everyone. Welcome to the newest installment of the webinar series Revenue Stream with RMS. Today we're going to discuss the plant-based foods category. My name is Alicia Kelso. I'm a senior contributor with Forbes.com where I cover the restaurant industry. Today I'm excited to be joined by four esteemed panelists, including Jen Bartashus. She's with Bloomberg. She's an analyst who focuses on consumer staples and retail and restaurants. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Alicia. Thanks so much for having me today.
We've got Sara Bittorf here. She's the Chief Experience Officer at TGIF. She joined the brand last year and is tasked with revitalizing it. Her insight today will cover how Fridays recently launched a new test menu, which includes several plant-based items. Hi, Sara.
Hi, Alicia. Great to be here.
Dora Furman, she's Revenue Management Solutions Vice President, and as part of this job, she is tasked with overseeing many accounts that are responsible for our relationship, including TGIF. She's going to discuss survey insights of 800 U.S. consumers and combine those industry trends and insights gained from existing client relationships. Hi, Dora.
Hi, thanks for including me today.
And finally, we've got Andrew Reid. He's the founder and CEO of the mobile-first market research platform RivalTech, which presents a modern way of gathering consumer insights via SMS chats. Andrew's going to discuss how brands can engage with millennials and Gen Z, who are essentially the driving force behind the plant-based movement. Hi, Andrew. Good to see you.
Hey, Alicia. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Okay, everybody, we've got a lot to cover here. This is a fun topic, and I know we're all looking forward to it. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We are going through the most prolonged change to dining habits this country has ever seen, obviously driven by, global health crisis. So I'd like to start by getting your perspectives on how, if at all, this change has affected the plant-based food category specifically. Jen, I'd like to start with you. Can you give us a high-level perspective on the plant-based category in terms of expanded products, expanded categories, anything you're seeing along those lines?
Absolutely. So there's really a very interesting dynamic happening with COVID-19. And we've seen a lot of plant-based meats shift into retail channels, mostly from restaurants. And so for a lot of people, the first time they try a plant-based alternative is really in a restaurant because it's less risky, it's more affordable, there's less confusion about how do I prepare it or what do I do with this stuff. And then it gives them a pathway to purchase at the retail setting. So once they have that experience, they can kind of incorporate it and think about where they want to go. So with COVID, what we've seen is that the trend has really moved away from restaurants and into retail. And part of that is just it's been more affordable for people to spend their money at grocery these days. They're spending more on food preparation at home. And what started out in a category at retail that was really burgers and kind of nuggets is really expanding. And so what we're seeing are meatballs, sausages, different forms of those products that are easily accessible to the average cook. So it's easy to take pre-made plant-based meatballs and sub them in for meat, for real meatballs. And these products, though, as they've been developed to help consumers, I think will also come into play at restaurants as the recovery starts to happen because they're already kind of ready to go. And so that's sort of the big picture trend that we're seeing right now with regards to where those dynamics have been shifting. Okay,
interesting. And Sara, what are you seeing specific to TGI Fridays as it relates to these dietary shifts? Are you seeing, increased demand? And if so, has the concept sort of met those demands while navigating some other challenges that the pandemic has wrought, like, decreased sales or traffic issues?
Yeah, so, before COVID, we were one of the first brands in casual dining to put a plant-based burger substitute on the menu. I mean, other than, like your veggie burger that's been around for a long time, we put the Beyond Meat burger on. And we did see increased demand for that, so much so that we had some new products in the works to extend it to a chili product and nachos and other kinds of fun products. But I think what happened when the pandemic occurred is that the visits declined so much. I mean, eating in a restaurant was almost not happening, and there was, obviously a shift to off-premise that, as Jen said, that eating behavior moved to home. And so now restaurant visits are more special, and you're not going to sort of take that risk of a plant-based product when you're craving that beef burger that you've been, thinking about for a week. So, when you make a decision to go to Fridays, it's automatically an indulgent decision, and I think people are foregoing those plant-based products during this time, and I do expect it to shift back once things open up a little bit.
Okay. Andrew, is it safe to say that this is a generational thing? I mean, are younger generations driving this plant-based consumption demand, or is it cross-demographic? What is your research saying?
Yeah, our research shows that that millennials and Gen Zs are real emotional purchase drivers. And so you obviously are having a segment of those that are people that have maybe been vegans all their life. You have a lot of people also that are really trying to connect to some issues around things like corporate responsibility and sustainability, and as much as taste and the food being able to mimic the meat-based products, we're finding that people really are thinking about sustainability factors, thinking about how they can connect to larger issues. And so there's definitely a shift we're seeing that's quite significant with this younger generation. It's still really early days, but it's going to be interesting to see, I think, how this carries out over the next few years.
Yeah, no doubt. That is really interesting. So, and Dora, I want to transition to you because I know that you also swim in these metrics, and RMS's, Consumer Insights has, they have an abundance of information here. What are you seeing based on that data about plant-based in terms of increased trial or frequency? Can you tell us your thoughts as to what's going on over there?
Yeah, so we conducted 2 surveys, as you mentioned, 800 consumers, and we conducted it twice. So back in January and comparing it to August. So what we're seeing through the pandemic, that trial has increased. So it was at 23% back in January, now it's up to 30%. So that trial is there. But what we found, and very in line with kind of the numbers and data that Sarah's speaking to in Fridays, that frequency has declined. So where in that survey in January, someone might respond and say they were eating plant-based a couple times a week, it might have now shifted to once a week or once a month. And I think that really kind of goes back to overall restaurant frequency has declined. And when you're making that choice to dine out during COVID or order food, you're probably leaning into kind of those tried and true items and those indulgent items that you're looking for. Overall, when looking at client data, everyone's kind of jumped on the wagon. They all have plant-based items, they're testing them and trying them. And the initial kind of launch and media focus definitely drives some people in. But once you kind of come off media, there is that bit of a fall off in that mix of those products, which is around 2 to 3% from what we see in our clients, depending on what they're offering. And so obviously, question is, well, why is that mix so low? And I think price is ultimately what we're seeing is one of the big hurdles. The products are expensive for our clients. There are definitely trades, as much as it might be people are willing to pay a premium because they are passionate about the environment, but how much of a premium? And then we have the whole world of flexitarians. They're not vegans where they really have no other choice. It's really, I'm eating meat, but maybe I want to do better for the earth or eat a little healthier. And so if it's a $2, $3, $4 premium, there's that balance. And so, we did find in our survey that 54% of consumers did find it a bit, expensive. But 40% of the respondents said, they would be willing to try it if it was more affordable. So I think, looking at pricing and price parity, there'll be more trial. But I think some of that trial is a little bit hindered right now from the restaurant space versus retail, just because of that dining frequency being down. So kind of going back to Sarah's comment that as people continue to dine out, I think we'll continue to see kind of that uptick in the mix.
So in your opinion, then, if we could keep that in mind, but move into another topic, is there staying power here? What does the decrease in frequency hinder the potential for staying power in this category, or do we need more innovation and availability? Jen, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a great point, and I'll play a little bit off of what Dora was just talking about. But innovation is really important in this category because it's still a young category, and there's just so many directions it can go. The consumer today is just going to continue to look for new things. That's sort of just the nature of where we are as people at this point. People want different flavors, different textures, different interesting things to try. So I think the innovation is going to be pivotal in that staying power of the plant-based movement. Limited trips to restaurants, they're still pushing people to the familiar, as Sarah was saying. That is going to change, though. As things reopen and things get back to normal, people will get back more into experimentation and expanding their horizons when it comes to food. And we're seeing interesting things happen. So recently there was a joint venture announced between PepsiCo and Beyond Meat, and that just shows that there's a lot of potential for brands to take that plant-based alternatives into completely new categories. And that's part of what I think will also help give the movement long legs in terms of where we're going. And then back to what Dora was saying, price really is important. It's starting to slowly come down. We're seeing that at retail. And volume is really the answer there. So the higher the volumes, the more prices come down, the more affordable things are. There's still a pretty big price percentage between replacement products and actual proteins. But the data that we're looking at shows that when that price gap shrinks to say 10% above a traditional protein, sales rise. So there's a clear threshold for consumers as to where that point is that they're willing to pay up for this product. And so higher volumes, innovation will help to close that gap. And then as pricing becomes more equal, I think you'll see real acceleration in the sector.
Okay, great. Sarah, does that apply to TGIF specifically, in your opinion, just trying to get those innovations churned out or price parity? What are you seeing for your brand in an effort to maintain some longevity here?
So just to piggyback on what Jen was saying, I did see a data point recently that said that basically 3 out of 4 people were looking forward to more product innovation after the pandemic had kind of waned. And so I do think that while people are definitely going for the kind of tried and true right now, they're sort of hungry for this. There's going to be a pent-up demand for some innovation, and I think plant-based foods can play in that. In that area. For us, it's always going to come down to taste. That we, especially at TGI Fridays, nobody that's coming to Fridays is expecting to trade off taste for healthy, right? You're going when you go to Fridays, you're going for that, fun food, that indulgent experience, and so. Just as a baseline, it has to taste good. The other thing Jen mentioned and Dora mentioned is price, right? If I'm going to participate in this, then you can't gouge me for it. I have to feel good about what I'm paying, and I think that I can say from Friday's perspective, we've had a little bit of an issue with that, especially with some of the products that we have been testing. One of them was nachos, one of them was potato skins. When you're looking at the option of a potato skin with Beyond Meat chili and the regular potato skins on the menu, if there's a significant price premium plus the risk of, am I really going to like this? Is it going to be as satisfying as the potato skins I know and love? Then you start to put up real barriers for people. So I do think that the industry has to deal with those two things. But I also think that there's going to be a tipping point where everybody's just going to have to carry it. And at that point, when the volume is there, it will become mainstream. And it's kind of like Starbucks. 5 years ago, it was hard to get almond milk. Now you can get it anywhere. And that same thing, I think, is going to apply to this category.
Okay, great point with the almond milk and Starbucks. I appreciate that insight. Andrew, we've talked about innovation and the necessity too of price parity. Based on your research, how important is it to get in front of these consumers as it applies to social purpose. I know you and I have had a conversation about this in the past. I know it's a big deal for the younger consumers. I know that you tend to research. So how much does that come into play here for the longevity piece?
Yeah, I don't think this is. I think people do a lot of research, and we've conducted a lot of research around kind of trendsetters, people that are young, people that have even diverse heritage or backgrounds, and we're finding that some of those groups are chronically underrepresented in research. This is something that I think is really here to stay, and the parallel I was drawn when thinking about this is a brand like Tesla. When you think about why are people buying electric cars? They're buying electric cars because this is a really cool car that's got a bunch of technology in it. They buy it because it's going to have a really great impact on the environment. If you flip over to plant-based products, I think it's very similar in the fact that you have some people that are doing this because specifically around their diet. You have some people that are doing this because of social purpose like animal cruelty. Or, I saw a report the other day that said something like there's, over 600 liters of water needed to create a burger. And so for some people are going to play on, more environmental impact issues. So I think we're going to see this continue to grow. Again, like I said before, it's early days. So this is from the research we're seeing, not a fad, something that's here to stay. And we're going to see it continue to climb in the years to come.
Okay. And Dora, I do want to kind of go back a little bit because we did talk about some of those innovation pieces with Jen and Sarah. What is most important here to keep up with the current pace of trial? Is it that innovation? I mean, we've seen that, I think Sarah mentioned it earlier. We saw it with plant-based burgers, and then that moved into plant-based sausage, and we've seen plant-based chicken. What is going to help with that trial pace here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a hard place as far as our brands when they're innovating with the plant-based right now, because they're making choices as far as their media dollars and what's going to drive most bang for their buck. So I think innovation is important. And I think it's definitely important to have those products on the menu. And kind of going back to Andrew's point about kind of the generational, we know Gen Z, 90% are passionate for the sustainability and the environment. And Gen Z can influence the parents' decision of where we're going to dine and make that restaurant decision. And so that's going to continue to grow. So I think innovation is important, but executives like Sarah have to make decision on launching those products and what it's going to do to drive overall profitability for the store. So making sure that the cost is there. I think that's number one. We're not seeing a ton of incrementality when you launch it, but there is a segment that's coming in, and we've tested it and seen that it is driving an incremental occasion. And this is obviously pre-COVID, but it's how do you drive enough to then say, a TGI Fridays, instead of promoting their ribs, there's so many people that buy the ribs. Am I going to spend those dollars on something that might bring in 1% versus maybe bringing in 5% that are coming in for ribs? So there's always that balance. And so I think some of the staying power is definitely, getting the prices right, communicating the sustainability part as far as the environment and maybe taking a different angle on the message, co-branding the products, co-messaging with other products. So going back to Fridays with the potato skins, that's one of their top sellers, so we've got potato skins, but we've got the plant-based as well. So then you can still really draw on a fuller population and get the bang for the buck for the media dollars. So I think it's going to be a little bit of creative marketing to keep it around, and then obviously working on the cost, making sure that it makes sense to the restaurants to invest in those products to encourage that trade-in.
Okay, so we talk about the longevity piece here, but it's also important to talk about the trial piece, because there's a huge segment of people who've yet to try it, even though we've talked about the growth there. So Jen, something you mentioned earlier really kind of stuck out to me, and that is the staggering growth of sales in the retail and grocery space. I'm curious to know if that has led to more comfort, more familiarity with some of these products, and if that is going to bode well for more trial at restaurants, in your opinion.
Yeah, we're seeing a really interesting kind of circular effect take place where a lot of initial trial came from restaurants and then demand shifted to grocery. And now what we're seeing in monthly point of sale data from the retail side is that repurchase rates are starting to rise. And that really gives this movement a lot of longevity, because it's one thing to try it, but it's another thing when people continue to repurchase it. And so we'll be watching the frequency that people are repurchasing it, but the increased familiarity and the more it's part of people's actual routine, the more likely they are, and I think, to then extend that out when they go back to restaurants as well. Once they get over that pent-up demand that Sarah was talking about, about comfort food and getting back into things, when things start to kind of rebalance, I think that will help restaurants long term. And in April and May, when the meat processing plants closed because of COVID issues, it made protein there was a big spike in prices for meat products. And plant-based alternatives really had a moment to shine with consumers, because all of a sudden that price gap evaporated. And there was availability in stores, and the where their products are placed in stores are easier for people to see. They're in fresh cases now, as opposed to often a separate section. And so this is helping to feed that repeat purchase rate as well. So that big bump, just because of that industry closure event, is actually really good for this industry. And it could mean that long term that the marketing money, it becomes a little less important because people are already more familiar with the products. And so going forward, that should hopefully translate out to be a benefit for restaurants as well.
Yeah, no doubt. Sarah, I want to take a different angle because of your unique perspective with the brands. What is the potential here as it applies to a veto vote for your customers of having a product like this on your menu?
Well, we at Fridays, we talk about being a place for people of all stripes, and that's really about welcoming, everybody. And so we, when we introduce Beyond Meat, and when we're looking at these options of Beyond Chili, nachos, and potato skins, it's really there to provide a choice for people. And we think that that's an important part of this. So in answering your question, yes, we think it could potentially be a big thing to address the veto vote. I also think that there's something to the frequency story that Jen was telling, and that is that, if you think about it, how often can you go to Fridays and eat a big beef burger? Not that often, right? But could you add a Beyond Meat product to your repertoire and then visit twice as often? And that's part of, I think, the equation that needs to happen in order for these products to be embraced by the restaurant industry. They have to add some level of incrementality instead of just trading, either incrementality in creating a new audience, attracting a new audience, or incrementality in increasing the frequency at which you can visit a certain restaurant.
Okay. And Dora, kind of along those lines, are you seeing anything with RMS's research that shows, any sort of consumer preference toward brands that offer plant-based products?
Yeah, so going back to our survey, we did find that there is an increase. There are a number of households that would choose one brand over the other if there's that plant-based offering. And one thing that's interesting is that it was 2 out of 5 family households would actually go towards a brand that has plant-based, whereas with 1 out of 4, in a single family household. So I think it's interesting because it kind of goes back to the Gen Z comment, right? That you're seeing kind of potentially a higher number of likelihood to go to brand, kind of going back to that veto vote. Providing food for all stripes of people, ages, and such. So I think that having those items on their menu are critical, and especially when you kind of think of that family unit where you have different eating behavior among all generations within that family.
All right, Andrew. With that in mind, I recently wrote a story that interested me as it applies to your research, that younger consumers are more comfortable returning to dine-in, and therefore sort of leading this recovery in the industry. And I'm curious to know your perspective based on your research about whether or not this bodes well for the plant-based category specifically.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. So just definitely that younger generations are playing this role with returning, and I think also with changing the role of dine-in and how dine-in, and really driving a big shift, and plant-based is part of this. Sarah's comments about Fridays being a place for all stripes fits exactly into that new composition you're seeing with younger people dining together, where you've got people that have, you maybe have a table of four with very different eating habits, and how can you find a place that can actually accommodate all those different eating styles. I also love the comments about, trial. Do you need to go straight to a main to be able to experiment with plant-based, or are there ways that you can have a amuse-bouche, so to speak, and have that experience? So I think we're seeing that, and what we're forecasting is after the pandemic, we're going to see something that's very new and really helps to transform both the way that consumers dine in and this idea of sustainability, and how do you cross over sustainability with that table of four people and some of the emotional connections they have and to these new plant-based products.
Okay, great. And I want to talk capital here because the category is still relatively new. Obviously, we've seen a lot of activity in this space. And that has obviously led to adoption rates going up. But I want to know what your thoughts are on capital investments moving forward as we look at the environment that we're in now. Are we going to see new entrants in the space? Are we going to continue to see, these companies throw money aggressively at marketing efforts? Jen, what's your opinion on capital activity here?
Yeah, well, entrepreneurs chase growth. And so when people see the types of growth that that some of the companies in the industry are posting, it entices interest. And when we're looking at plant-based sales, you're likely to see the number of entrants and investors behind those entrants continue to rise. In 2020, we saw almost $1 billion of investment behind companies in the plant-based space. And we think that that's only going to continue to grow as it becomes more and more interesting to people. And the other thing is that if you have another IPO that is successful, Beyond Meat really woke everybody up to the industry, at least on the capital allocation corporate side of things, right? And so you have a lot of companies aspiring to follow that path of success. So, for example, it's been speculated for a while that Just, with their replacement egg products and other product lines, may be interested in pursuing an IPO as well. So as you start to see that kind of success, you see even more entrants into the space, which just fuels innovation and then availability and all the things that we were talking about before.
Okay. And Dora, if we see that, obviously my assumption is that bodes well for the price parity piece, but in your opinion, are we going to see that continued marketing investment sustained as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think restaurants will continue to jump into that because they're kind of riding that wave of, the overarching kind of the retail marketing and out there and the awareness. And so I think we'll continue to see that. But, as mentioned earlier, there's going to have to be that decision, from a marketing perspective. And obviously in the middle of COVID right now, when marketing dollars are tight, not as much, I think, as far as kind of rolling dice on that platform, kind of in 2021. But as we get into 2022 in recovery, I think there will be brands that will want to jump on that and see how, test the waters from incrementality. Digital is a really safe place to go. Obviously not as expensive as TV. PR, and I think that becomes that opportunity is how do you use PR, get some free media out of initiatives. And so I think it's going to go back to that creativity from a restaurant's perspective to drive that external traffic in the doors. And doing that would be things like that digital and the social and the co-branding, as I mentioned earlier. Is there that opportunity where you bring a bunch of brands together with Beyond and say, hey, you've got Beyond at all 10 brands, and we're in it together. We're in it for the environment. So I think there's going to be some creativity that continues to drive that.
Okay, Sarah, that sounds like quite a challenge, balancing, all those marketing approaches with, investment in the product in general, as you're trying to still navigate a crisis. Can you provide any color on what your brand is doing, to sort of balance this investment piece in the plant-based category?
Sure. So one of the interesting things that happened as a result of the pandemic is that restaurant menus were able to simplify. And in fact, they, in a lot of cases, they had to simplify because you just didn't have that many people running a restaurant anymore. And so there's been a desire, I'll say, on at least on Fridays, and I'm going to say on behalf of the industry in total, to be able to take certain items off of the menu for a really long time. But it's very difficult to do because you get, this emotional response from people who say, where did my item go? But during the pandemic, we had that permission. And so we've been able to streamline the menu. What that means is, in order to add things to it, they're really going to have to earn their keep. And so we're going to have to get to that point where, I don't think it's ever going to be, I'll call it mainstream, but a huge part of the mix. But it does need to justify the expense of menu listing it, carrying it as a SKU, thawing it, prepping it, whatever is involved in it. Those products are going to have to earn their way onto the menu, and they're still very niche. So in terms of supporting from a marketing standpoint, there's only a handful of players out there who can afford to put this on broadcast television. It's going to continue, I think, for a little while to be a niche item that satisfies a small group of people. But if it does it well, and profitably, then it has a place for us.
Okay. And then Andrew, where will brands, in your opinion, get the most bang for their buck? Dora threw out a number of marketing channels that they have to contend for now, including the co-branding piece, the digital piece. If that is the best audience to capture here off the get-go, what is your opinion on where those investment dollars should go? What do they care about?
I think it's definitely not going to be an easy task in the fact you have to do innovation on both sides. The innovation has to happen at the menu level and the food level at the same time on the messaging and on the marketing and targeting side. And this is going to be about really targeting to youth, these niche markets. Dora's ideas about going to digital make a lot of sense. I mean, it's amazing. I saw an article the other day that Honda just launched a new car on Twitch. So they're going to very different, trying to really target and go to exactly where that segment is, where they're spending time, and be marketing to them there. I think that's where you're going to see the most bang for your buck. And to Sarah's comment, I think that constant marketing and willingness to stay with the customer, continue that dialogue, and stay with them, you're going to start to see that transform in a really interesting way. I'm not going to say necessarily that you watch the ability of some of these these younger generations to really drive markets in a significant way when they feel they're being heard and they're being understood. So that linkage is going to be massively important going forward. Okay, great. I'm going to ask all of you to whip out your crystal balls now. This has been, there's a lot of information here to digest, and from what it sounds like, all of you still believe that we're very firmly on the ground floor here. So I'm interested to know, your takes, your unique perspectives here on your predictions for plant-based product and category growth, both in the near term and maybe extended beyond 2021. Jen, we'll start with you.
So we're very optimistic about the long-term growth of plant-based food, and we just see huge opportunity in the market, and that we're going to see more competitors come in, more innovation ongoing, and it's just going to create this virtuous cycle of experimentation, adoption, and integration into everyone's lives. For 2021, I think there is potential for another successful IPO. As I mentioned, that is going to drive money into the sector. It'll probably help with the price points. The one thing that we haven't touched much on that we also see as a short-term big opportunity are blended products. And we see an opportunity here for brands that aren't 100% sure they want to move fully into the plant-based space to put a toe in the water and use blended products. So a burger that is half beef, half mushroom. Things that are still approachable for the consumer, but you're not fully going into that plant-based commitment. that, and some of the challenges with that Sara and Dora have both touched on. And so we think that there's big opportunity there to see some more of that happening in 2021. And altogether, when you think about, from a sales perspective, we're forecasting that we could see plant-based meat alternative sales past $2 billion in 2021. So we're pretty optimistic about the sector and where we're headed.
Awesome. All right. Sara, what about you? What are your predictions for the category for this year and if you may, beyond?
So I'm going to take some inspiration from my son, who is a vegan, and say that I'm going to predict that there could be a bifurcation that occurs where, we've been talking about plant-based in terms of meat substitutes. And I really like what Jen said about, like the half beef, half mushroom, because I do think that there's going to be a lane where people are going to say, I want to help the environment, but I like what I like. And so I'm looking for substitutes for that. But I also think that down the plant-based route, there's also another lane, and that's vegetables and legumes and things like that are a little bit more natural. We haven't really talked about how there is some concern among some people about what's actually in those meat substitute things. And so I do think that there's some ripe opportunity in that direction.
Okay. Andrew, what are your thoughts on the category and your predictions?
So this is definitely a longer term thing. Brands and restaurants that make plant-based alternatives part of their strategy long term are going to win. I think this comes down to things like, how do you deal with in the restaurant trial, targeted messaging, this commitment to these younger segments, and to continue to stick with them and to make sure you're talking to them on their terms in their way. And even just listening to Sara talk, thinking about transparency. Are there ways that we can be really transparent about what is in these products and where these come from and some of the positive impacts that they are having to continue with those connections. So it's going to be an interesting time to see how this evolves. But this is definitely, I think, part of a bigger movement, and that may not just be about just meat products, but in general about how we're transforming the restaurant industry.
Right. Interesting times indeed. Dora, let's end on you. What are your predictions here?
Yeah, I think everyone has brought up some, really good points. And I think, speaking to those other plant-based menu items is really key. I think there's no question, like, people are really passionate about the environment. They're going to want to move towards those products. They're going to think about their health. So, 2021, I think, is going to be telling. I think it's not going to move a lot in 2021, just given to the trial and the dining occasion. But as we, emerge out of the pandemic, I think we're going to continue to see that growth, that people are going to move to those plant-based items. And, it is about that messaging about it's better for the environment, and restaurants are going to have options to talk about packaging, talk about the message. So I think there's a lot of growth that we're going to start seeing in 2022 and beyond.
All right, everybody, thank you so much. I've loved having this conversation. This is obviously a very important topic. I think all of us could probably talk about it all day. And I'm sure we have plenty to follow up on, and both in the near term and long term. So in the meantime, to stay up to date with Revenue Stream and all of RMS's research, visit revenuemanage.com or follow the company on social media. They've got an active LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter account. Thanks so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.